Have you ever wondered why someone can love you deeply and still disappear without warning? Why they pull away right when things start feeling real? Why the moment connection becomes stronger, they suddenly become colder? It confuses the mind, it breaks the heart, and for a long time, it makes you question your own worth. Because when someone runs from you, the first thing your mind tells you is, maybe I was not enough. But what if that is not the truth at all? What if the reason they ran had less to do with your value and more to do with the emotions they could not handle inside themselves? Stay with this video until the end, because once you understand the hidden psychology behind avoidance, you will stop blaming yourself for their distance. You will finally understand why some people run from the very connection they secretly crave the most. And more importantly, you will learn something powerful about your own emotional strength that can completely change the way you see love, rejection, and human behavior forever. Most people think avoidants leave because they do not care. That is the biggest misunderstanding. The truth is much deeper than that. Many avoidants do not run because they feel nothing. They run because they feel too much, and that truth changes everything. You see, some people were taught very early in life that emotions are dangerous. Vulnerability was not safe for them. Depending on someone did not feel comforting. It felt risky, painful, unpredictable. So over time, they learned how to survive by shutting parts of themselves down. They became experts at looking calm while silently struggling inside. Experts at acting distant while feeling overwhelmed emotionally. Experts at leaving before they could be left. And this is why things become complicated when real connection enters their life. At first, avoidants often enjoy the connection. They enjoy the attention, the conversations, the comfort, the emotional safety they slowly begin to feel around someone. But then something changes. The bond becomes deeper, the feelings become stronger, the emotional closeness becomes real, and that is the exact moment fear quietly enters their mind. Because closeness sounds beautiful to a healthy heart, but to a fearful heart, closeness can feel like losing control. The deeper the connection becomes, the more emotionally exposed they start feeling. Suddenly, they are not just talking to you, they are emotionally attached to you. Your presence starts affecting them. Your silence affects them. Your energy affects them. And that level of emotional dependence scares them more than people realize. So what do? They create distance. Not always because they stopped caring, sometimes because caring became too intense. This is the part many people never understand. Avoidants are often fighting battles inside themselves that they do not know how to explain. One side of them wants love. The other side fears what love demands emotionally. One side wants connection. The other side fears vulnerability, rejection, disappointment, and loss of freedom. So they become trapped between desire and fear at the same time. And when fear wins, they run. Not because you are weak, not because you are unlovable, but because emotional intimacy activated something unresolved inside them. Think about it carefully. Why do avoidants often pull away right after moments of deep closeness? Right after emotional conversations? Right after vulnerability? Right after things finally start feeling secure? Because safety itself becomes terrifying to someone who is not used to emotional security. For many avoidants, chaos feels familiar. Distance feels safer than closeness. Independence feels safer than emotional reliance. They learn to survive by needing nobody. So when they finally meet someone who reaches their heart deeply, their nervous system does not always interpret that as peace. Sometimes it interprets it as danger. That is why they overthink small things. That is why they suddenly become emotionally unavailable. That is why they confuse themselves. One moment they pull you close. The next moment they disappear into silence. And if you have ever experienced this, you know how painful it feels, because you start replaying everything in your head. You wonder what changed. You search for answers in every message, every conversation, every moment. But the painful reality is this: sometimes the strongest emotional reactions come from people who are trying the hardest not to feel vulnerable. Avoidants are not always running from you. Sometimes they are running from the emotions your presence awakens inside them. That is why the connection often feels so intense in the beginning, because deep down they are emotionally hungry too. They crave understanding, they crave peace, they crave connection just like everybody else. But when they finally get close to it, fear begins whispering inside their mind. Fear of getting hurt, fear of losing themselves, fear of depending on someone emotionally, and eventually being abandoned. So instead of risking pain later, they create distance now. This is not emotional maturity, it is emotional protection. And the hardest part is that many avoidants do not even fully understand why they do this. They only know that closeness starts making them uncomfortable. So they convince themselves they need space. They convince themselves something feels wrong. But often, the real issue is not the connection itself. The real issue is that genuine intimacy forces them to face emotions they spent years avoiding. And here is the truth that changes everything. People do not run from what means nothing to them. They run from what affects them deeply. Nobody becomes emotionally overwhelmed by something they never cared about. Nobody spends energy escaping emotions that never touched their heart. The stronger the emotional impact, the stronger the urge to regain control. And for avoidance, distance becomes control. But distance does not erase emotional connection. It only hides it temporarily, because the very connection they run from is often the same connection that stays alive in their mind long after they leave. And this is where the story becomes even more painful. Because after creating distance, many avoidants believe they will finally feel free. They think space will silence the pressure building inside them. They expect relief, calmness, emotional balance. For a short time, that illusion works. The silence feels comfortable in the beginning. No difficult conversations, no emotional responsibility, no intense attachment pulling at their mind. Everything becomes quiet again. But eventually, another feeling starts replacing that temporary comfort. Emptiness. Not the kind people talk about openly. A silent emptiness, the kind that slowly appears in ordinary moments, during late nights, during long drives, during random pauses in the middle of the day. Because human emotions do not disappear simply because someone walks away physically. Feelings pushed down into the subconscious do not die. They wait, quietly, patiently, and over time they begin returning to the surface. That is why avoidants often seem completely unaffected at first. While another person is crying, questioning everything, and struggling to sleep, the avoidant may look emotionally detached, almost cold. But many people misunderstand this stage. Emotional suppression is not emotional absence. Some individuals disconnect from feelings automatically because their mind learned that emotional numbness feels safer than emotional exposure. But the human heart cannot stay disconnected forever. Eventually, the distractions lose their power. They try staying busy. They bury themselves in work, entertainment, social media, temporary conversations, new routines, sometimes even new people. But no distraction fully replaces a meaningful emotional imprint, because genuine connection leaves traces inside the nervous system, especially when someone brought peace, understanding, or emotional safety into their life in a way they rarely experienced before. And this is where silence begins affecting them differently. At first, they controlled the distance. Then, the distance starts controlling them. The absence becomes louder than expected. Certain memories begin replaying without warning. A specific laugh, a simple message, a calming energy. The way they felt emotionally understood without needing to explain everything. Small details suddenly become emotionally heavy because the mind finally has room to process what it escaped from earlier. This is the hidden psychological truth many people never see. Avoidants often delay emotional processing. They do not always experience emotions in real time like emotionally expressive people do. When things become intense, their brain focuses on survival first. They disconnect, withdraw, escape internally. But later, when the emotional pressure settles down, the feelings they avoided begin catching up with them slowly. And sometimes that delayed realization becomes stronger than the original emotion itself, because now there is distance, now there is silence. Now there is loss mixed with memory, and human beings often understand value more clearly after its absence creates emotional contrast. This is why some avoidants start revisiting old conversations in their mind long after leaving. This is why they randomly check messages, photos, or social media, not always because they suddenly changed overnight, but because unresolved emotional attachment continues existing underneath their protective behavior. Many people think avoidants forget easily. In reality, some of them remember deeply but process privately. That is an important difference. There are emotions they never expressed, thoughts they never explained, attachments they never admitted openly. And when the connection is gone, those unspoken emotions can begin echoing inside them much louder than before. Because human psychology works in strange ways. People often recognize emotional security only after losing access to it. And this creates an internal conflict that many avoidants struggle to escape from. One side of them still wants independence, still wants emotional control, still fears vulnerability. But another side starts missing the emotional experience they had with that person, the comfort, the emotional familiarity, the feeling of being accepted without pretending. That conflict creates emotional confusion. They begin wondering why nobody else feels the same, why other interactions feel empty, why temporary attention does not satisfy them emotionally, because surface-level distractions cannot replace deep emotional resonance. And once someone reaches a deeper layer of the heart, forgetting them becomes far more difficult than avoidants usually expect. This is why emotional detachment often cracks in silence, not during chaos, not during distraction. Silence exposes everything people were trying not to feel. And slowly, the avoidant begins facing a reality they tried escaping from earlier. Running away did not remove the emotional bond. It only delayed the confrontation with it. That realization can become extremely uncomfortable because now they are forced to sit with emotions they spent their whole life avoiding. Regret, longing, curiosity, emotional absence, and perhaps the hardest feeling of all, realizing someone truly mattered more than they originally admitted to themselves. But pride often keeps them silent for a long time. Fear still exists. Fear of rejection, fear of accountability, fear that too much time has passed, fear that reaching out might expose feelings they still do not fully understand themselves. So internally, they continue fighting between emotional desire and emotional self-protection. And this battle drains people mentally more than they show publicly. Some avoidants become restless during this stage. Others become emotionally reflective. Some try convincing themselves they made the right decision while secretly replaying memories at night. Because deep emotional experiences leave psychological fingerprints. They shape the nervous system. They alter emotional expectations. They create comparisons with every future connection. And this is why certain people remain unforgettable, not because of perfection, but because of emotional impact. A real emotional connection changes people internally, especially people who spent years avoiding emotional depth. When somebody reaches the parts of them they normally keep hidden, the experience becomes difficult to erase mentally, even after separation, even after silence, even after distance, because you can physically leave a person, but you cannot easily escape what they awakened inside you. And that is the moment something inside them begins changing, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly at first. Because once the emotional noise settles down, clarity starts entering places where fear once lived. The same person who once needed distance to feel secure now begins questioning why that distance still feels incomplete, why freedom suddenly feels lonely, why life continues moving forward on the outside while something unresolved remains alive internally. This is the part nobody talks about enough. Avoidants do not always return because they suddenly became fearless. Many return because the emotional connection continued growing in their mind even after separation. Time created reflection. Silence created awareness. An emotional absence forced them to confront truths they were too overwhelmed to face earlier. Human beings are deeply emotional creatures, even when they pretend not to be. The heart remembers experiences that made it feel alive, especially experiences connected to emotional safety, understanding, acceptance, and peace. Those feelings leave psychological marks that are difficult to replace with temporary distractions or surface-level interactions. That is why some avoidants start comparing every new experience to the one they left behind, not intentionally. It happens automatically. A conversation feels empty, a connection feels forced, a presence feels emotionally distant, and suddenly they realize something painful. It was never easy to find someone who truly reached them emotionally in the first place. This realization creates emotional pressure inside them, because now they must face a truth they spent months avoiding. The person they walked away from may have actually mattered deeply, not in a casual way, not temporarily, but in a way that touched hidden parts of them they rarely allow anyone to access. And when that realization becomes strong enough, many avoidants begin feeling pulled back emotionally, not because loneliness alone brings them back, but because emotional resonance is rare. Real connection is rare. Feeling emotionally understood without pretending is rare. And when someone experiences that kind of bond, the nervous system remembers it long after the relationship changes form. This is why avoidants often reappear unexpectedly, not always with perfect words, not always with emotional maturity. Sometimes they return confused, hesitant, uncertain, because the battle inside them still exists. Part of them wants closeness again. Another part still fears everything closeness awakens emotionally. That internal contradiction is exhausting. Imagine wanting comfort while also fearing dependence, wanting intimacy while also fearing emotional exposure, wanting love while also fearing the possibility of pain. This is why avoidants often move back and forth emotionally. Their heart pulls them toward connection, while their survival instincts pull them toward self-protection. And yet, despite all that resistance, many still come back. Why? Because certain emotional experiences become impossible to ignore forever. There are connections that touch people intellectually. There are others that touch people emotionally. But the rarest connections touch someone psychologically. They change the way a person feels internally. They create emotional depth that continues echoing even during long periods of silence. And avoidants are not immune to that. In fact, people who spend years suppressing emotions are sometimes affected even more strongly when somebody finally reaches their inner world, because underneath emotional distance often exists a deep hunger to feel accepted without judgment. That is what makes the experience unforgettable. Not perfection, not constant happiness, but emotional authenticity. The feeling that somebody saw beyond their walls and still stayed emotionally present. Once that happens, running away may create physical separation, but it does not erase emotional memory. The mind continues revisiting moments connected to emotional significance. The body continues remembering the emotional atmosphere connected to that person. And over time, the avoidant begins understanding something important. Peace without meaningful connection can still feel empty. This realization changes the emotional equation completely. Earlier, they believed emotional distance would protect them. Now they begin recognizing the emotional cost of that protection, because avoiding vulnerability also means avoiding deeper intimacy. Avoiding emotional risk also means avoiding emotional fulfillment. And eventually, some people become tired of surviving emotionally. They start craving something real again. That is when regret can appear. Not always dramatic regret, sometimes quiet regret, the kind that appears during reflective moments, the kind that whispers, "Maybe I walked away from something important because I was afraid." And fear has a powerful way of convincing people to abandon things they secretly value most. This is why emotional growth often begins after loss. Loss forces reflection. Loss removes distractions. Loss reveals emotional truths people were too busy avoiding before. And for many avoidants, distance becomes the teacher they never expected, because separation exposes what attachment was truly worth. The person they once viewed as emotionally overwhelming now becomes emotionally meaningful. The closeness they once escaped from now becomes the thing they miss privately. The emotional consistency they once struggled to receive now becomes difficult to replace anywhere else. And this is where the deepest truth exists. The reason they disappeared and the reason they return often come from the exact same emotional source: intensity. Strong emotional connection activates both desire and fear inside avoidance at the same time. Earlier, fear controlled their actions. Later, emotional truth begins overpowering avoidance. The feelings they once escaped from become the same feelings pulling them back emotionally, because human beings cannot endlessly ignore what deeply moves them inside. Eventually, emotional honesty begins demanding attention. Eventually, the heart grows tired of emotional hiding. Eventually, some people realize that the connection they feared most was also the connection that made them feel most alive. And that realization changes everything internally. Because once someone understands they cannot easily replace the emotional impact you had on their life, distance stops feeling like freedom. It starts feeling like loss. And this is where your own transformation begins. Because while so much attention gets placed on why avoidants leave, why they struggle, and why they sometimes come back, there is another truth most people completely ignore. Your life cannot become trapped inside someone else's emotional confusion. Your value cannot depend on whether another person is emotionally ready to recognize it. And the moment you truly understand that, everything starts changing inside you. Too many people lose themselves trying to hold on to someone who is running from their own emotions. They over-explain, over-give, over-sacrifice. They keep thinking that if they love harder, stay softer, become more patient, or prove themselves enough, the avoidant will suddenly stop fearing intimacy. But human psychology does not work that way. The more desperately someone chases emotional validation, the more they abandon their own emotional center. And ironically, that energy often creates even more distance, because avoidants are highly sensitive to pressure, not always spoken pressure, emotional pressure. The feeling that someone needs reassurance constantly, the feeling that someone is emotionally collapsing around them, the feeling that they are becoming responsible for another person's emotional stability. For someone already afraid of emotional weight, this can activate an even stronger urge to retreat internally. That is why chasing rarely creates security. It creates imbalance. And the painful part is that many caring people confuse chasing with love. But real love does not require destroying your peace to keep somebody close. Real connection should not force you to betray your dignity, silence your needs, or shrink your self-respect just to avoid being abandoned. The moment you begin abandoning yourself to hold on to another person, suffering quietly enters your life, because now your emotional state depends entirely on their attention, their responses, their mood, their presence, and their decisions. That kind of attachment slowly drains confidence from the human spirit. It creates anxiety, overthinking, emotional exhaustion, and without realizing it, many people begin living in survival mode emotionally, always waiting, always hoping, always trying to decode silence. But your life was never meant to become a prison built around somebody else's inability to face emotions. And this is the lesson many people only learn after heartbreak forces them to wake up emotionally. You cannot heal another person by sacrificing yourself. You cannot force emotional readiness into someone who still fears vulnerability. You cannot love someone into becoming emotionally available before they decide to confront themselves honestly. That realization hurts at first, but later it becomes freedom. Because the moment you stop chasing, something powerful happens psychologically. Your attention begins returning to yourself. Your energy starts rebuilding internally. Instead of obsessing over who left, you begin reconnecting with the parts of yourself you neglected while trying to save the relationship. That shift changes everything. Your mind becomes clearer. Your emotions become calmer. Your self-worth slowly stops depending on external validation. And suddenly, silence no longer feels like punishment. It starts feeling like protection. This is the emotional strength many people misunderstand. Strength is not becoming cold. Strength is remaining emotionally grounded without begging somebody to choose you. Strength is knowing your heart has value even when another person lacks the capacity to handle deep connection consistently. And there is something psychologically powerful about people who stop chasing approval. Their energy changes. Their presence changes. They stop reacting from fear. They stop forcing outcomes. They stop trying to control another person's emotional behavior. Instead, they begin choosing themselves fully. That kind of emotional stability creates respect naturally. Not because it is manipulation, but because emotionally secure people do not abandon themselves trying to keep others from leaving. And strangely, this is often when avoidants begin feeling the emotional impact more strongly. When the constant pursuit disappears, they notice the emotional absence differently. The energy they once expected to always remain available suddenly becomes unavailable. The emotional safety they once took for granted no longer surrounds them automatically. And that shift creates reflection, not because somebody played games, but because human beings often notice value more deeply when they stop receiving constant access to it. This is why emotional detachment combined with self-respect becomes so powerful. Not fake detachment, not silent revenge, genuine emotional growth. The kind where a person finally says, I will no longer lose myself trying to keep somebody who refuses to face their own fears. That mindset changes your entire emotional reality, Because now you are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself, and people who choose themselves carry a different energy internally. They stop begging for clarity. They stop chasing mixed signals. They stop accepting emotional inconsistency as proof of love. Instead, they begin protecting their peace with maturity and self-awareness. That does not mean the pain disappears instantly. It means the pain stops controlling your identity. And over time, this emotional shift creates something beautiful inside you. Confidence rooted in self-respect instead of external reassurance. Inner peace rooted in emotional balance instead of attachment anxiety. A deeper understanding that your worth existed long before somebody entered your life, and it will continue existing even if they leave. That is real emotional power. Not controlling people, not making somebody regret losing you, but becoming emotionally whole, whether they stay or go. Because at the end of the day, the deepest transformation is not about understanding avoidance. It is about understanding yourself, understanding why you tolerated emotional confusion for so long, understanding why you ignored your own needs while focusing only on theirs, understanding why you kept chasing closure from people unable to provide it consistently. And once you finally learn those lessons, your entire perspective changes. You stop romanticizing emotional unavailability. You stop confusing inconsistency with depth. You stop seeing your love as something that must be earned through suffering. Instead, you begin realizing something life-changing. The right connection will never require you to destroy your peace just to keep it alive. And sometimes, the moment you stop needing somebody to stay is the exact moment you finally remember your own value again.